I never thought that I would have a baby of my own, she said. But then you came along. You were so easy. I was never nicer than when I was pregnant with you. My labor was 3 hours from water break to holding you in my arms. You were always in a hurry. Birthing you was the most rewarding and the most difficult work I've ever done. The stories of the births in our congregation are absolutely amazing. I have been fortunate enough to have had many of you share those birth stories with me this past week. They are stories of persistence and of loss, of wonder and of disappointment, of control and lack of control. This congregation's birth stories include stories of expectation, of synchronicity, and of surprise. Now, for anyone who's been privy to the path of the birth of a child, one thing is very, very clear. There is the science of conception as we understand it, and then there's the miracle. One mother in our congregation wrote, "We were looking to complete our family. We knew we had enough love to share, that we had more love to give. But getting you here was not easy. With every try, the process became more and more intense, more clinical, less intimate. It seemed that the more time that passed, the more people we had to involve. And then, that day I found out I was pregnant, I found out that there was more than one of you. It looks like we needed 2 people in order to make our family whole." How we came to be is not as simple as the movies might suggest. You know, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl, boy and girl get married, they have children, and they live happily ever after. In the midst of that fairy tale are the complications and the interventions of life. Because, see, families don't always look like we might expect. And our best laid plans, well, they're just subject to change. Another member wrote, "After 8 hours of labor, the doctors finally decided on a C-section. I was not prepared for that. This was not in my birth plan. I was wheeled into surgery, strapped down virtually naked with my arms out to the sides in the sign of a cross. In front of a dozen strangers, I was cut open. The only thing I remember feeling during that part of labor was the relief of pressure when your tiny foot was finally pulled from my ribs." She says, "I've never felt more vulnerable. Much like pregnancy, giving birth was really out of my control. I had to put my faith into someone else, into God and doctors and family." Now, even though science now understands more about fertility than we ever have, there is much more involved in the miracle of birth than just the science of egg and sperm. One member said, "We tried everything. I knew that there was another soul out there that was meant for us. And so we filled out the pages and pages of applications. We made a scrapbook of our lives to show how perfectly that you would fit into it. I had thought I would be pregnant again, but instead you were conceived and born from our hearts. And we knew from the very beginning that you were ours." The authors of the Bible knew. They knew that even 2,000 years ago. If we trace the birth stories in Scripture, we find that these stories reflect the fact that much of conception is completely out of our control. In the Bible, women birth not of typical childbearing age. Children are floated down rivers to the hands of princesses. Angels intervene and God plays a hand. Another mother in our congregation said, "I couldn't believe I was pregnant. I wasn't ready. My life was not the place for a child. Giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. But because I love you, I wanted to give you the biggest gift I could, a better chance." You see, every child is labored, and every birth is a miracle. Our ultimate biblical example, Jesus of Nazareth, whose birth story we celebrate in the midst of the darkest time of the year, reminds us that our heritage, the heritage of every child ever born, is a mix of our labor, our circumstances, and the work of the Spirit. In the two narratives of the birth of Jesus, one in Matthew and one in Luke, there are two very different stories. Each has a different theological emphasis, but the stories together, I believe, tell the miracle of birth. In Matthew, the story begins with what seems like another list of biblical begats. Though on closer analysis, this beginning in Matthew hints at all of the twists and turns of the plot that were required in order for the birth of Jesus to be realized. The birth stories of our own congregation mirror this concept of necessary chance meanings and happenstance, of purposeful and accidental conception, of children born in other states and other nations in the midst of war and struggle, children born at the peak of life and at the threat of the life of the mother, of children that thrive despite all the odds, stories of children who were kept, and stories of children who were given away. These birth stories, all of these stories, are of those whose lives have gathered here, at this time, in this place, in this church. In the book of Matthew, Jesus' birth story begins by tracing the convergence of lives. Jesus is presented in Matthew as the Son of Man, or more specifically, the son of a king, fulfilling the prophecy of the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, all of this was in hindsight, of course. But the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ in Matthew, it is written, the son of David, the son of Abraham. To Abraham was born Isaac, and to Isaac Jacob, and to Jacob Judah and his brothers. And to Judah were born Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And to Salmon was born Boaz by Rahab. And to Boaz was born Obed by Ruth. And to Obed, Jesse. And to Jesse was born David the king. And to David was born Solomon by the wife of Uriah, etc., etc., etc. Until we arrive at, and Jacob was the father-in-law to Joseph, the husband of Mary, who gave birth to Jesus.